Everyone loves the idea of time travel. One minute you're stuck in traffic, the next you're walking through ancient Rome, or standing beneath the pyramids. It sounds like an escape from stress, from noise, from now. But here's what we don't like to admit. History didn't come with seatbelts, or antibiotics, or mercy. The past is filled with invisible dangers, irrational beliefs, collapsing cities, and skies that sometimes stopped shining, literally. The truth is, if you arrived in the wrong century, it wouldn't feel like a grand adventure. It would feel like a horror movie, one where the rules don't apply, where even your clothes could get you killed, and the locals pray you vanish. One where you don't speak the language, everyone thinks you're cursed, and you can't find clean water, let alone Wi-Fi. Today on Armchair Archaeology, we're counting down the worst possible times to time travel to. The eras that would tear you apart, body and soul. And stick around, because at the end, we'll reveal one historical moment so bizarre, the world went dark, and no one alive understood why. Let's begin. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community of curiosity seekers. Each week, we explore the strange, the lost, and the unforgettable corners of history. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Wars have beginnings and endings. At least most do. But in Central Europe, during the 30 Years' War, war became the environment. It didn't just disrupt life, it replaced it. What began as a religious dispute between Protestants and Catholics spiraled into one of the longest and deadliest conflicts in European history. But calling it a war barely covers it. Foreign powers like France, Spain, and Sweden all piled in. Armies came not to liberate, but to loot. Civilians weren't caught in the crossfire, they were the targets. Homes were burned, harvests stolen, towns emptied. In areas like the Palatinate and Württemberg and Bohemia, entire towns ceased to exist. Some regions lost over half their population, and entire communities vanished from the map. The social structure crumbled. No schools, no trade, no trust. And where famine spread, disease followed. There are first-hand accounts of families roasting roots and leather for food. In some corners of Germany and Bohemia, people resorted to cannibalism. It wasn't folklore, it was documented, desperate reality. The most haunting detail? Children were born into the war, raised in it, and died in it, without ever knowing peace. For them, chaos was normal. Their lullabies were gunfire and sermons about wrath. They didn't inherit a culture, they inherited trauma. Drop into this era, and there's no safe side. You'd be a stranger in a world with no rules and no forgiveness. Speak the wrong dialect, wear the wrong fabric, and you're branded a spy, a heretic, or worse. This wasn't just the fall of law, it was the collapse of meaning. After 30 years, the fighting finally stopped. But what remained was a continent full of ghosts and fields that remembered only the dead. The year is 1347, and the first sign of disaster arrives by sea. A ship drifting into port, its crew dead or dying. Then it happens again, and again. What spreads next is unlike anything Europe has ever seen. It entered through the ports and spread like wildfire, by flea, by breath, by fear. The Black Death isn't just a plague, it's an unraveling of the known world. Within 4 years, as much as half the population of Europe will be dead. In cities, the dead are stacked in carts. In the countryside, silence spreads faster than the disease itself. There's no understanding of infection. People blame foul air, divine punishment, or celestial misalignment. Doctors wear beaked masks filled with herbs, convinced the scent will shield them. Science hasn't caught up. Fear fills the void. The collapse isn't only physical, Entire villages are abandoned overnight, their inhabitants either dead or fled. Crops rot in the fields. Livestock starve in their pens. Priests refuse to give last rites. Parents abandon sick children. And sometimes children do the same. It's not cruelty, it's terror. With no cure and no clear cause, trust evaporates. The powerless took the blame. Foreigners, the poor, and entire religious communities scapegoated and slaughtered. In dozens of cities, thousands of Jews are burned alive, accused of poisoning wells. A modern stranger, dressed oddly and speaking differently, would be seen not as a visitor, but a threat. Even survival is no victory. The world you'd emerge into would be fractured, paranoid, and grieving. Economies collapse. Labor systems shift. Art becomes darker, fixated on death. And yet, this wasn't the end. The plague returned in waves for centuries, but nothing matched the sheer speed and psychological devastation of its first arrival. In this moment, death wasn't the worst part. It was being left behind to bury the world that came before. If you could time travel, but only to the past, which era would you least want to land in? Drop your answer in the comments. We love seeing your takes on history's harshest hours. For a brief moment, at the end of the last ice age, the world began to warm. Glaciers retreated, rivers swelled. In the Near East, humans started planting grain. Life was becoming stable, predictable. Then, without warning, Earth reversed course. The younger Dryas was a sudden and extreme drop in global temperatures, likely caused by the release of vast amounts of glacial meltwater or even a comet impact. Within a matter of years, possibly even months, the planet plunged back into Ice Age conditions. Temperatures dropped by up to 10 degrees Celsius, rainfall patterns collapsed, forests died, and with them, the animals and people who depended on them. This wasn't the world before civilization. It was the world that could have become civilization, until it froze. The humans of this era had no metal tools, no permanent shelters, no writing, just tight-knit groups, stone blades, and stories passed through generations. Most of them didn't survive. Entire species vanished, from mammoths to saber-toothed cats. But it was worse for the humans. Whatever security they had just begun to build, farming, food storage, cooperation, shattered. Survival became a minute-to-minute struggle. Drop into this era, and you wouldn't find danger in battles or borders. You'd find it in the wind. You'd breathe freezing air into lungs evolved for warmer climates. You'd starve on plants you can't digest and meat you can't catch. And you'd face a planet in mourning, not for one species, but for an entire way of life that never got the chance to begin. In the ruins of that near civilization, myth may have taken root. Some scholars believe the global flood stories found in ancient cultures began with this extinction-level winter. And here, there's no one left to remember what was lost. If ancient mysteries and forgotten civilizations spark your imagination, check out our new ebook, Secrets of the Ancient World. It's packed with stories of lost cities, strange technologies, and unsolved enigmas that challenge everything we think we know about the past. You'll find the link in the pinned comment. At the start of the 1500s, Tenochtitlán was a marvel, a city on water, with causeways, aqueducts, and markets so vast they stunned even the Spanish chroniclers who would help destroy it. This wasn't a primitive backwater, it was one of the most sophisticated urban centers on Earth. And in 1521, it fell. The Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire wasn't just a military campaign, it was a collision of worlds, one armed with steel and horses, the other with centuries of deeply rooted belief and complex politics. But the first weapons Spain brought wasn't a sword, it was smallpox. Long before many indigenous people ever saw a European, they were already dying. Disease swept ahead of the conquistadors, wiping out leaders, breaking social cohesion, and leaving cities undefended. Entire communities collapsed in silence. It was an apocalypse without a battle. When Cortes and his allies, including rival indigenous groups, laid siege to Tenochtitlán, the city was already weakened. Water was cut off, food ran out, corpses piled in canals. The invaders closed in, while the empire fractured from within. To enter this world would be to step into a society in its final, agonizing breath. Foreigners were not exotic, they were omens. You'd be met not with awe but with fear, fury, or both. And the horror wasn't just in the destruction, it was in what never recovered. Temples razed, books burned, gods silenced. The entire worldview of an empire was shattered, replaced by one that saw no value in what came before. When the Spanish built over the ruins of Tenochtitlan, they didn't just erase a city, they paved over an entire way of understanding the world. And the echoes of that silence are still heard today. We often imagine the fall of Rome as a single dramatic event. Fires, barbarians at the gates, an emperor dragged from his throne. But the truth is slower, stranger, and far more unsettling. By 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire wasn't so much conquered as it was hollowed out. The aqueducts still stood, but many no longer flowed. The legions, once feared across continents, were fractured or replaced by mercenaries with shifting loyalties. Trade routes had dried up, cities emptied, and law, that most Roman of inventions, became more theory than practice. For most people, the collapse wasn't a spectacle. It was a series of small absences: a vanished grain shipment, a broken road unrepaired, a tax collector who never returned. Then came the famines, the plagues, the raids, and something deeper, knowledge itself, began to erode. In parts of the former empire, people forgot how to make concrete. Structures once built to last millennia crumbled because no one remembered the process. Libraries fell into ruin. Literacy rates plummeted. The ability to preserve and transmit information faded with every generation. There were still rulers, soldiers, and towns, but nothing held them together. Roman identity became a memory wrapped in myth. Arriving in this moment wouldn't place you in the ruins. It would place you in the unraveling. You'd see fragments of greatness, surrounded by rising uncertainty. You might speak Latin, but not the right kind. You might offer coin, but find it worthless. You'd be stuck in a world that looked familiar, yet no longer worked the way it once did. This wasn't the end of Rome in fire and fury. It was death by forgetting, and the long, echoing silence that followed. If you're enjoying this journey through history's shadows, consider leaving a super thanks. It's a great way to support the channel and help us keep bringing the past to life. There are disasters you can see coming, storms on the horizon, armies at the gates. But in the year 536 CE, the sky itself turned against humanity, and no one knew why. Across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, the sun began to dim, not just for days, but for more than a year. Shadows lengthened even at noon. Crops withered in midsummer. Snow fell in China during what should have been harvest season. In Ireland, famine took hold. The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave light without brightness, as if the moon had replaced it. No one had the words to describe what was happening. There were no satellites, no meteorologists, no scientific explanations. People believed the sun was dying, or that the world itself was ending. Some fasted and prayed. Others turned to fear and violence. And just as hunger gripped the land, a new catastrophe arrived: plague. Within a few short years, the Eastern Roman Empire was hit by the first wave of what would become the Justinian Plague, a pandemic that would kill tens of millions. To live in 536 was to exist in a world where cause and effect no longer applied. The sky refused to warm. The ground refused to feed. The body refused to survive. There were no enemies to fight, no leaders to blame, just a sense that something vast and unknowable had broken and the rules of life had collapsed with it. Historians now call it the beginning of the darkest period in the Dark Ages. And what caused the sky to dim so completely? That secret would remain buried for over 1,000 years. But we'll get to that in the end. When people think of the European conquest of the Americas, they often imagine battles, treaties, and explorers planting flags. But the most devastating part of the story happened before most of those encounters ever began. The arrival of Europeans in 1492 triggered one of the most profound demographic collapses in human history. Not through war, but through biology. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza, carried unknowingly across the ocean, spread faster than horses or ships. In many regions, entire populations died before ever laying eyes on a European. The scale is hard to fathom. Some scholars estimate that up to 90% of indigenous peoples across the Americas died in the century following first contact. Cities were emptied. Sacred knowledge was lost. Generations vanished. Imagine arriving in a world where civilizations were crumbling in silence, where entire villages had become ghost towns, not from conquest, but from coughing fits and fever. Social structures collapsed, not because of superior weapons, but because leaders, priests, and elders died within days of one another. And to the survivors, the connection was unmistakable. The strangers from across the sea brought sickness and death. Even unarmed, even unaware, your very presence would be seen as the beginning of the end. Food networks broke down. Trade routes faltered. Rituals went unperformed. In many regions, the trauma of the collapse lingered long after the last symptoms faded. This wasn't just a loss of life. It was a loss of language, memory, and identity on a continental scale. The conquest didn't begin with war. It began with breath. And if you arrived in that moment thinking you were an observer, you'd already be part of the disaster, whether you meant to be or not. At first, it seemed like a fluke, a cold day in June, a late frost in July. Then the rivers froze in August. In 1816, the planet skipped summer. Across North America, Europe, and Asia, skies stayed gray. Snow blanketed fields in midsummer. Crops failed en masse. Livestock died in the pastures. People lit fires in the morning and watched their breath at noon. The cause wasn't known at the time, but it came from the other side of the world. The previous year, Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted in one of the most powerful volcanic explosions in recorded history. The ash reached the upper atmosphere and spread globally, blocking sunlight and altering weather patterns. But in 1816, no one could see that far. All they knew was that the sun had stopped behaving. In cities, food prices soared. In rural villages, people ground up bark and weeds to survive. Famine led to riots, looting, and waves of migration. In Switzerland, trapped indoors by freezing rains and failed harvests, a small group of writers told ghost stories by candlelight. One of them, Mary Shelley, gave the world Frankenstein, a monster born in a world that had lost the sun, fitting for a year that felt stitched from nightmares. There's a unique horror in a disaster that has no visible enemy. No army, no plague, just cold that won't end and skies that never clear. You couldn't reason with it. You couldn't fight it. You could only endure it or not. And even when the skies brightened again, the damage was already done. Families were displaced, economies shaken, and across the northern hemisphere, the memory of a year when the seasons betrayed them remained sharp. Not every disaster is loud. Some come quietly, on the wind, in the sky, and in the silence of seeds that never sprout. It's the dream scenario for many time travel fantasies. Land among the dinosaurs, towering beasts, endless forests, a world untouched by human hands. But the Jurassic period is no place for someone made of soft skin and social instincts. Let's start with the air. The atmosphere of the Jurassic was very different from today's. Oxygen levels were lower, and carbon dioxide was far higher. Breathing would be difficult, not instantly fatal, but enough to leave you dizzy, gasping, and weak. Even standing still would feel like running a marathon. Then there's the landscape. Nothing is familiar. No grasses, no fruit, no edible grains. The plants are ancient, cycads, conifers, giant ferns, and almost all of them are toxic or indigestible to humans. The animals are worse. Some of them are the size of buildings, others the size of dogs, with teeth like steak knives. You're not predator, you're not even prey. You're irrelevant, a slow, wheezing anomaly in a world built to ignore you. You'd be surrounded by life, but unable to eat, rest, or even breathe properly. There's no shelter, no firewood, no tools. And if you injure yourself, a twisted ankle, a bad cut, you're done. The Earth itself would feel alien. The continents aren't in the same place. The nights are longer. The stars above are scattered in strange configurations. You wouldn't just be lost in time, you'd be lost in reality. This world isn't waiting for you. It has no use for you, and it certainly won't notice when you stop breathing in the middle of a steaming jungle, filled with things that don't care whether you're intelligent, just whether you're edible. If this glimpse into deep time gave you chills, our ebook, Secrets of the Ancient World, dives into the real mysteries behind lost civilizations, ancient science, and strange discoveries that shaped human history. Links in the pinned comment. We've looked back at wars, plagues, and famines, but the era most hostile to human life might not be buried in the past. It might be just ahead. The near future is often imagined as sleek and streamlined, faster travel, smarter machines, cleaner cities. But what if it's not progress we're heading toward, but disintegration? Climate systems are growing more volatile each year. Seas rise while fresh water disappears. Heat waves scorch regions once temperate. Storms erase coastlines. Crops fail in places that once fed millions. Entire parts of the world could become uninhabitable in a single generation, not because of war, but because the environment simply stops allowing life. Then there's the technology. Artificial intelligence reshapes work, politics, even reality. Truth becomes optional. Identity becomes fluid. And meaning? It might not survive the upload. Algorithms decide what you see, what you trust, and what you remember. In this world, your values, your education, your language, even your identity, batrashi, might not translate. You could arrive in a society where everything familiar has been replaced by systems you don't understand. You might not be hunted by beasts or infected by disease, but you could be overwhelmed by complexity, disconnected, forgotten, a relic of a slower age in a world that doesn't wait. And if the future doesn't collapse in fire, it may collapse in confusion, a breakdown not of infrastructure, but of meaning. The terrifying truth is that there's no guarantee tomorrow will be more livable than yesterday. We already feel the tremors, rising temperatures, collapsing trust, competing truths. If history teaches anything, It's that civilizations break, and the future won't protect you just because you're from the past. Some time periods kill you with swords, others with silence. This one might kill you with speed. So what turns a moment in history into a death sentence? It's not always war or disease. Sometimes it's how utterly unprepared you'd be, dropped into a world where your instincts fail, your immune system betrays you, and everything you rely on simply doesn't exist. Your clothing, your language, even your body would mark you as strange. You'd be a walking contradiction, too advanced to trust, too ignorant to survive. Dangerous, other. We romanticize the past, and we put our hopes in the future, but both are places where humans like us might not stand a chance. And now, the fun fact we promised. That eerie darkness in 536 CE, when the sun dimmed for over a year and crops failed across continents, wasn't a curse or omen. It was the aftermath of a massive volcanic eruption, likely in Iceland. The ash was blasted so high into the atmosphere that it veiled the Earth in shadow for over 18 months. Civilizations collapsed, people starved, and no one alive at the time ever knew why. They suffered and died without answers. And that's the most terrifying part of all. Because whether it's the fall of empires, the silence after a plague, or a future we can't yet understand, the real danger of time travel isn't what happens around you. It's what you don't see coming. We dream of escape, but maybe the only time we're truly built to survive is right now. In every direction, danger waits. Behind us, history's chaos. Ahead, a fog of uncertainty. Thank you for embarking on this journey through history's most dangerous hours. If you found this exploration captivating, support Armchair Archaeology by giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing for more journeys into the past that shape our future. Hit the bell to stay updated. Which era would you fear landing in the most? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the flame of curiosity burning bright.